Everyone. As we talked about on the first day, I'm part of the organizing team. My name's Naomi. I'm a technical education specialist at the eScience Institute. So I help scientists figure out what areas of their skills they want to build up. And I figure out how to help them do that in an efficient and effective way. But by training, I'm an electrical engineer who did a whole lot of computer and software hacking, which is to say I survived in the software nerd trenches for years and years, which left me with some lasting opinions about ways to work with each other so as to not induce terror and tragedy and violence, which is why I've made this presentation for everybody. For those of you who have been to these Hack Weeks before, this is a rerun, but hopefully it's an entertaining rerun. It's called Group Work. And really what this tutorial is about is collaboration. And I mean this in a much fuzzier way than what Romina was talking about. I'm talking about interpersonal collaboration, which I think can be beautiful, but also really difficult, because there are all sorts of power dynamics and interpersonal styles that clash when we start talking to each other. I think that broadly we follow a bimodal distribution in terms of how we talk to each other when we have a shared task that we're trying to complete. Some of us are sharp and pointy, and others of us are soft and round. And when we're sharp and pointy, it's easy to needle each other and to do things subconsciously that make it harder for your teammates to collaborate in their most productive selves. And when we're soft and vulnerable, oftentimes the way that we are participating is not within our control. It's sort of out of our hands how much we're able to bring to the table because we are feeling hurt in ways that we might not even really be able to verbalize. And I personally feel like I have a really bimodal experience with this, because from my time in the software industry, I spent a lot of time being a sharp, pointy person. I think that, I spend a lot of time trying to be fuzzy and nice, but when I'm working on technical projects, I kind of have a reputation of being intense and not too pleasant to be around, which is why I've put a lot of work into figuring out how to not be that way. Because when I pivoted from computer hardware to data science, I started doing Hack Weeks like this. And that is the first time that I've ever found myself in that soft, round dynamic where I found it very hard to trust my own abilities and trust whether I should be present in a group or not. This picture on the right is a selfie I took to send to my partner at a Hack Week where I was feeling like absolute garbage and was crying in the bathroom. And the picture on the left is what I looked like when I worked at Apple. So accepting the premise that just telling each other that we want to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Oh man, I reworded this, so my TED Talk style just got interrupted. Accepting the premise that it's not enough to just say do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What concretely are we doing wrong? And I'm posing this as a prompt to you because, I think we all want to show up and be good teammates for each other, but the truth is that some of us always leave events like this one feeling a little bit alienated and a little bit isolated, and we want to reduce the amount of effect we have on each other so that that doesn't happen. So I'm interested in people's thoughts about what is missing from just saying, quote, be a nice partner. And I would love for you to think about this for a minute and type your response into the Slack channel 2023 Hack Week. But hold off on pressing the enter button. I don't want you to submit your response until I say go. And then I want to see a flood of responses in the Slack channel all at once. So I'll give everyone a minute to think about this prompt. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Love seeing people typing. All right, take a minute to finish up the sentence that you're writing. I'm gonna ignite the cascade of responses. Okay, 3, 2, 1, enter. Yeah, okay, great. Woo. Ego, less communication, failing to ask your collaborators how they prefer to communicate. Overpowering personalities, it's not even an action that you're taking, it's just the way you are being around others. Getting defensive when an idea or an approach is questioned. Ooh, discomfort sharing in a new group. I like that some of these are referring to states that we can be in when we are spiky, and some of these are when we are round. Lack of compassion. Collaborators are not awake nodes. Work together to make sure everyone has clearly defined tasks, so those in the mushy realm who don't speak up don't end up sidelined. It's hard when you're in the mushy realm to advocate for yourself. When we think we are the boss, which we all know is silly because Anthony is the boss. Ignorant of other people's ideas and feelings. Thank you for the phone, Mark. That was amazing. I've never had that before. Yeah. You know, these are all factors that make it really hard to be productive collaborators with each other. And so I think that starting from the base assumption that we're all trying to be good partners, we can look at all of these things and identify, you know, some of them are things we can change, and some of them aren't that easy to change on a dime, like just given a little tutorial like this and a few days of working with each other. A lot of good collaboration is built through trust. And so what this tutorial is going to be about are just some quick hacks that you can think about when you're feeling spiky or when you're feeling soft and vulnerable, to try to help move that process along so that you can build trust more effectively with your teammates. And so these things might look like rules just because of the way I'm presenting them in a slide deck format, but I really want you to think of these as just ideas about ways you might approach your interpersonal mechanics, the same way you might be looking for tips about ways to structure your code blocks in a Python notebook, or tips about how to use slide rule to grab the subsets of data you care about. So my first tip is for those of us that feel spiky and like dominant personalities. This is just whenever you're thinking about using pronouns in the way you are addressing your group, to use collective pronouns instead of individual ones. So even if you're really just telling your teammate, hey, you got to install this thing on your computer, figure out how you can loop everybody at the table into this conversation. So instead of saying, you need to install IcePix with pip, you can say, let's install IcePix with pip. Obviously, you are not the person doing this. Your teammate is going to be the one doing it. But by phrasing it this way, you are subconsciously indicating that you are sitting down with them for that journey, and you are going to be helping them with this. You could say, instead of when you run this code, you'll get a type error, you could say when we run this code, we'll get a type error. Again, you are looping yourself into an oncoming disaster that you see is about to happen once the Python interpreter crashes. These are not, hard and fast ways that you should communicate with each other. But I find that when I am helping someone that I feel has less experience than I do in a given area, this is a really good way that I can feel a little less condescending, because I spent most of my time in industry being very condescending, which is fun sometimes, but in a Hack Week setting, not super useful, you know? And so this is my more general hack for those of us that feel like we're a dominant personality in a group, is to share softly. So what do I mean by that? I think that when we're working together, we have to get on the same page really effectively. We need to figure out what the other person knows, and we need to figure out what the other person that we're working with should be doing based on our understanding of the situation. The tricky part here is figuring out how to suggest things to our teammates and ask about our teammates' knowledge without making it feel like they're doing a PhD qual and they're being drilled with questions and given suggestions. Because the power dynamic really isn't that of a student and an advisor. It's really a collaborative team dynamic. So there are a lot of ways that you can go about softening your approach, but just some light tricks that I've noticed in my time being a mentor and a helper in situations like this one. I like shifting the subject of my language off of people and onto subject matter. And I'll have some examples of this in a minute. But you can think of this just in general of if you are imagining pointing to the subject of your sentence, rather than pointing at someone and going like, Joe, what science are you doing? I could be like, hey, Joe, what's that science over there? It doesn't really make that big of a difference in isolation like that, but when you begin talking to people about technical subjects, this can help a lot. I really like avoiding absolutes. I made a joke once at one of these Hack Weeks that you should never, ever do absolute sentences, but someone interpreted that joke literally and gave it as negative feedback at the end of the event. So like, all right, y'all lost privileges for that joke. Or at least if you do feel something really is absolute, like this is the wrong approach or this is a bad tool, explain the context of how you arrived at that opinion. You know, I think that like BASIC is a bad programming language to use for situations like this. And the reason I think that is because it really doesn't have the sorts of object-oriented primitives like what Romina showed us to foster collaborative development. It's not just that, quote, BASIC is garbage. I also think the flip side of this coin is to be careful about making judgments about triviality. So if you ever think something is going to not be a problem, it's nice to phrase that in a positive or helpful way rather than saying, oh, don't worry about that. It's not going to be a problem. And I think the most general version of all of these tricks is to just install a Python callback in your head, a little function that runs, and it asks yourself, how can I soften my current approach whenever you feel like you are driving the conversation in your group? There's nothing wrong with driving the conversation, but I have this little question pop up a whole lot in my head when I'm talking to people, and I'm always seeing, is there a grammatically correct way that I can steer the sentence that I am currently saying such that it approaches people in a softer way rather than a more pointed and direct way? These are things that I find are helpful in being a better teammate, because when I'm working on a technical project, I have a vision of where we can go. I want to get there quickly, but the reality of the situation is I want to get there with my teammates, and that's more important to me than getting there as fast and as efficiently as possible. So some examples of softened language. Instead of directly asking someone, do you know what Python is? You can ask someone to, tell you what they know about Python, or asking, what is your past experience with Python? Now we're making something from an absolute black and white into something that lets our teammate express their history with the technology to us. Instead of saying it's just a matter of reading in a file or opening a URL, we can say there are a lot of resources to help with reading a file, or this is a problem I know we can tackle together. You're inviting them to the table that you're sitting at. You're showing that you are someone that is accessible and approachable for the sorts of things you're doing together. This is a big one for folks that do a lot of teaching. We always want to say, does that make sense? Because we want to understand if we're doing a good job. And so ways that you can ask this question that don't subconsciously make someone ask whether they are intelligent or not are asking people what questions they have, or asking if I explained that well as the teacher. And once you think about this transformation from the gray box to the golden box, you'll notice it in a lot of the better teachers that you have in your life. It's like kind of like noticing in a movie that they have wires on the superheroes, and then you'll never not see the green screens and wires. Teachers do a lot of this just because it has a really profound effect subconsciously on how we approach someone. And talking about absolutes or suggestions, instead of just saying, you should use Xarray, or Xarray is trash, don't use that, you add context. I've had a lot of good experiences with this tool, or I'm worried about this tool for a specific reason, or for a host of reasons that's going to be really relevant to the work I want to do with you. And so now I'm moving from hacks for when we're feeling spiky and dominant to hacks for when we are feeling soft and round and vulnerable. So the first thing that I want to emphasize as we move into the real heart of the project work we're going to be doing this week is to celebrate personal goals. And the idea here is that we are all coming to this event with our own personal contexts and our own goals for what we want to get out of this time. But we are all moving at the same pace during this 5-day event. So success is going to look different for each of us. And so I encourage you to think about, as you begin doing the technical work this afternoon, think about what you are going to accomplish based on where you're starting from. Maybe if you haven't used Python before and you've mostly done R work, choose goals that will help you celebrate adopting a new technology that you haven't had much hands-on experience with, rather than expecting to be as proficient with Python as a tool that you've already been using for several semesters. I encourage you to identify lots of small goals that give you little wins along the way. This was a piece of advice that a mentor of mine gave me when I was at Apple and trying to be very high-powered and doing a whole lot of work. And I started feeling very distraught because it was taking me months to get my 2 paragraphs worth of code merged into the main code base. And I was feeling utterly unproductive and unable to get back into the game. And he said, you need to just do something really stupid and small, like clean up the icons on your desktop, and count that a win, because our brains need the serotonin hit of successfully doing something. So identify, things like being able to inspect data in a way that gives you more information than you had before, or maybe figuring out how to profile and time the amount of time it takes to retrieve data using a piece of code. These are successes, and they're successes worth celebrating, even if they are not the overarching goals of the hashtag product that you are working towards here. And finally, I think it's really useful to look at what is within your agency to achieve at any given time. Sometimes technology just does not collaborate with us, and we cannot get something to work. And that's, that sucks, but it's also okay. And there are things we can do, and there are things we can change that will give us successes and wins that are things we can actively work on at any given amount of time. And here's where I have a little demo about celebrating personal goals. I don't know if anyone has played this game before, but it's a game where you control this runner and you try to run as far as you can on this meter track. And so if you were to start off the hack week with some goals in mind, but you had never worked with slide rule and you had never worked with ICESat-2, I see some of you that have seen this game before know where this is going. You might expect to be able to load the data and do some science with it. And then you sit down on the first day, and it takes you a long time to just get your access tokens lined up so that you can even load the libraries that you need. In this game, you might look at it and go, oh, I would like to play this game and try to run 7 meters. And then if I were to suggest to you, maybe a better goal would be to try to run 1 meter, you might think that is ridiculous. But if we see me actually try to play this game right now, where I use these individual keys to control each muscle group of this person, you see it's kind of difficult to even get to 1 meter. And so it was not really practical for me to set a goal before I even tried the work that existed in the medium of this video game. Now that I've played this game once, I know that if I can get to 1 meter, then I consider that a huge win. And I always, when I give this talk, have to like keep myself from trying to play this game more and more. But the truth is, now that you've had a few, a few hours yesterday and a little bit of time today to begin doing technical work, assess how effectively you are going to be able to run with this stuff, and assess realistically how far you think you might be able to get by the end of this week. However far that is something worth celebrating. And it's something worth celebrating with your teammates as well. I really encourage you to celebrate your teammates' goals. So there's this concept of a hype man. It comes mainly from hip hop music, where you have a backup rapper who is supporting and cheerleading effectively the main person throwing down a verse at any given time. Here is the world's most famous hype man, Flava Flav, supporting Chuck D in Public Enemy. So I encourage us to all be hype men for each other, because even if someone's success seems too minor or there are too many successes to support for your teammates, trust me, it's not. We are all doing something new this week, and we can all use the validation. We are hard enough on ourselves internally in our own heads that any amount of validation coming from the other people around you can be really beautiful and supportive. And so my last hack for those of us that are feeling soft and vulnerable is to remember that experience is subjective. And so our teammates' experience of working with us is largely unrelated to our perception of their experience working with us. Which is to say, if we feel we are going really slow, or we are holding everybody up, or we are just not measuring up to how everyone else is doing, realistically, most other people that you're working with have that same narrative going on in their head at any given time. And they aren't thinking about you at all. You are a tiny speck of dust in their universe. Don't worry about it. And it's okay to make mistakes, both technical mistakes and interpersonal mistakes. Those of us that are pointy are going to hurt people, and those of us that are soft are going to get hurt. But that doesn't mean we don't care about each other and that we're not trying to support each other to be the best teammates we can be. Unconditionally, I think it's safe to say that everyone in this room wants everybody else to succeed. And so this is maybe another place to install one of those Python function callbacks, is to just remember that we are all trying to support each other, and whatever our experience is very much our own internal state and not necessarily reflective of the world around us. So to recap, here are your hacks. Use we instead of you. Share softly. Celebrate your personal goals and your teammates' goals. And remember that experience is subjective. And we put this here at this point in the week because we are about to break for lunch and then go deep, deep, deep into project work. And so I want you all to know that you are already doing an amazing job this week. And we are so excited to see you achieve your own personal goals for this time. And I think it's going to just get more fun from here.